Every empire begins with a promise. Every empire rises with ambition, and every empire ends in blood. Across thousands of years, across continents and cultures that never met, a terrifying pattern keeps repeating. A pattern that has transformed kings into tyrants, civilizations into machines, and human beings into mere numbers. Today, we're counting down the 10 most evil empires in human history, ranked not by myth, not by propaganda, but by the only thing empires can't hide: their death toll. The body count, the suffering, the systematic cruelty that wasn't accidental. It was the system itself. And here's what should terrify you. Every single one followed the exact same 6-stage pattern. Stage 1, grand vision. Stage 2, brutal expansion. Stage 3, industrial scale violence. Stage 4, dehumanization becomes policy. Stage 5, the empire turns on itself. Stage 6, collapse. However, the scars remain for generations. 10 empires, one 6-stage pattern, and by the end, you'll see it everywhere. Let's begin. Part 1. The pattern. Before we count down the list, you need to understand what makes an empire evil. Not just violent, not just authoritarian, but true evil. Because every empire in history has conquered, every empire has killed. War is brutal, but that's not the point. The point is when killing becomes systematic, when cruelty becomes policy, when an entire civilization is built on the suffering of others, and that suffering is intentional, organized, and justified by the state. Evil empires share 6 specific traits. 1. They don't just conquer territory, they erase identities. Languages banned, religions destroyed, entire peoples reclassified as subhuman. 2. Violence is industrial, not battlefield chaos, but organized mass murder, quotas for executions, bureaucracies for genocide. 3. They create systems that outlast individual rulers. One tyrant dies, and the machine keeps running. 4. Economic exploitation on a scale that destroys entire regions. Not just taxation, but extraction. Famines aren't accidents, they're policy. 5. They collapse not from external enemies, but from internal rot. The cruelty that built them up eventually consumes them. 6. The legacy lasts centuries. The trauma doesn't end when the empire falls. Now, with that framework, let's count down the 10 worst. And remember, these aren't ranked by territory or power, they're ranked by human suffering per capita, by the depth and the scale of the true evil. Number 10. The Aztec Empire. The Aztec Empire lasted from 1428 to 1521, just less than a century, but in that time they perfected ritualized industrial murder. The Aztecs believed the sun god, whose name I won't even try to pronounce, required human blood to rise each day, so they built an empire specifically designed to generate victims. They called them the Flower Wars, coordinated battles with neighboring states where the goal wasn't conquest, it was capture. Prisoners were taken alive, marched to Tenochtitlan, and sacrificed on temple pyramids. How many? Conservative estimates say 20,000 per year. Some historians say 250,000 over the empire's lifespan. And remember, this was just a century. The Great Temple's rededication in 1487, Spanish chronicles claim 80,000 people were sacrificed over just 4 days. Victims lined up for miles. Priests worked in shifts. The blood flowed down the temple steps and rivers. But here's what makes it evil beyond the killing. It was systematic theology. Children were taught this was necessary. The economy even depended on it. Entire regions existed just to supply victims. And when the Spanish arrived in 1519, many neighboring tribes allied with Cortés because they hated the Aztecs so much they would rather side with foreign invaders than continue the sacrifices. The Aztecs didn't just kill, they built a civilization where mass murder was the core foundation of daily life. That was number 10. Number 9, the Khmer Rouge. Cambodia, 1975 to 1979, 4 years. And in that time, 25% of the population perished. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge wanted to create an agrarian utopia. No cities, no money, and no intellectuals. Literally just rice fields and revolutionary purity. On April 17, 1975, they took the capital Phnom Penh. Within 48 hours, they evacuated the entire city. 2 million people were forced into the countryside at gunpoint. Hospitals emptied. Patients still in surgery dragged from operating tables. Anyone who resisted was shot. Then came the purges. Anyone with an education was executed. Teachers, doctors, engineers, you name it, people who wore glasses, they were killed for being intellectuals. You spoke a foreign language, killed. You had soft hands, killed, because that meant you weren't a peasant. The killing fields. Over 20,000 mass grave sites across Cambodia. At Chong Ek alone, 17,000 people were executed. Bullets were too expensive, so victims were bludgeoned with farming tools. In 4 years, 1.7 to 2 million Cambodians perished, 1/4 of the whole population. Starvation, execution, forced labor. And the ideology? Year zero. They literally reset the calendar. Everything before the revolution was erased. Families were separated, and children were indoctrinated to spy on their own parents. The Khmer Rouge didn't just murder, they tried to erase an entire culture's memory. When Vietnam invaded in 1979 and ended the regime, they found a country of mass graves and traumatized survivors. That's number 9. Number 8. The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire lasted over 600 years, from 1299 to 1922. For most of that time, it was a sophisticated, multicultural empire. But empires in decline become desperate, and in their final years, the Ottomans committed one of history's most methodical genocides, the Armenian Genocide, 1915 to 1923. 1.5 million Armenians murdered, not in battle, systematically exterminated. It began with a lie. Ottoman authorities claimed Armenians were collaborating with Russia during World War I. On April 24, 1915, they arrested Armenian intellectuals in Constantinople. Hundreds disappeared overnight. Then came the deportations. Entire villages forced on death marches into the Syrian desert. No food, no water. Women and children separated from men. The men were executed immediately. The women and children marched until they died. Rape was systematic, starvation was policy, and survivors report rivers clogged with bodies. And here's the evil part. It was bureaucratic. Government orders, train schedules, official documentation. This wasn't mob violence, it was state policy. The Young Turks, the ruling party, wanted an ethnically pure Turkish state. Armenians did not fit this vision, so they were erased. To this day, Turkey denies it was a genocide. They call it a wartime tragedy, but the evidence is overwhelming. 1.5 million people don't just accidentally die. The Ottoman Empire didn't just collapse, it tried to erase an entire people on the way down. That's number 8. Number 7. The British Empire. Here's the one that makes people uncomfortable. The British Empire, the largest empire in human history. At its peak, it controlled 25% of the world's land and 23% of the global population, and it was built on systematic exploitation and engineered famines. Let's start with India. The Bengal famine of 1943, 3 million dead, not from natural disaster, but from policy. Winston Churchill diverted food from Bengal to stockpile for British troops. When told people were dying, he asked why Gandhi hadn't died yet. He blamed Indians for breeding like rabbits. The Irish famine, 1845 to 1852, 1 million dead, 1 million emigrated. The potato blight was natural. The mass death was not. Britain continued exporting food from Ireland while people starved. Workhouses became death camps. Families died in ditches. The Boer War concentration camps. 26,000 women and children died. The British invented the modern concentration camp to hold Boer civilians. Disease and starvation were rampant. Kenya, 1950s. The Mau Mau uprising. Britain built detention camps where torture was systematic. Castration, rape, beatings. Over 100,000 Kenyans detained. Thousands executed. The British Empire's total death toll? Estimates range from 35 million to over 100 million when you include famines, wars of conquest, and colonial exploitation. The evil wasn't just the killing, it was the bureaucratic indifference. Famines were policy tools. Entire regions were underdeveloped to benefit Britain. Cultures were erased, languages banned, histories rewritten. And when the empire fell, they called it granting independence, as they were doing a favor. That's number 7. Number 6, the Japanese Empire. Imperial Japan, 1868 to 1945. They called it the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. The reality? Industrialized barbarism. The Rape of Nanking, December 1937. Japanese troops captured the Chinese capital. What followed was 6 weeks of systematic horror. 300,000 civilians murdered, mass executions, beheading contests between officers, literally competing to see who could decapitate more people. Rape was systematic. Estimates range from 20,000 to 80,000 women. Bodies filled the Yangtze River. But Nanking wasn't an isolated incident. Unit 731, Japan's biological warfare program. They tested plague, anthrax, and chemical weapons on live prisoners. Vivisections without anesthesia. Freezing experiments. Over 10,000 people tortured to death in medical experiments. The victims? Chinese civilians, Soviet prisoners of war, Koreans. The doctors called them logs. Comfort women. Up to 200,000 women, mostly Korean and Chinese, were forced into sexual slavery for Japanese soldiers. Systematic rape camps across occupied territories. Forced labor. Millions of Chinese, Koreans, and Southeast Asians enslaved to build infrastructure for Japan. Death rates were astronomical. Total deaths caused by Imperial Japan, 6 to 10 million in China alone. Add the Pacific, Korea, Southeast Asia, and that gives you over 20 million deaths. And here's the final insult. After the war, many perpetrators were never even prosecuted. The United States granted immunity to Unit 731 scientists in exchange for their research data. That's number 6. Number 5, the Mongol Empire. 1206 to 1368. The largest contiguous land empire in history. At its peak, it stretched from Korea all the way to Hungary. And it was built on terror as policy. Genghis Khan's strategy was simple: surrender or die. Not just soldiers, everyone. When a city resisted, the Mongols didn't just conquer it, they erased it. Baghdad, 1258. The Mongols destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate. They killed 800,000 to 1 million people in just 1 week. The Tigris River ran black with ink from destroyed libraries, then became red with blood. Nishapur, 1221. The Mongols killed 1.7 million people, every human being and animal in the city. They reportedly built pyramids of severed heads. The Mongol invasions depopulated entire regions. China's population dropped from 120 million to 60 million. Persia lost 75% of its population. Central Asia never fully recovered. But here's what makes them evil beyond battlefield slaughter: psychological warfare. The Mongols wanted stories of atrocities to spread. Cities surrendered without a fight because they heard what happened to resistors. They used biological warfare, catapulting plague-infected corpses over city walls. They massacred civilians to break morale, and then they enslaved artisans and killed the rest. Total death toll? Estimates range from 30 million to 40 million, roughly 11% of the global population at the time. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they depopulated whole continents. That's number 5. Number 4, Maoist China. The People's Republic of China, 1949 to 1976 under Mao Zedong. The single deadliest regime in human history by total body count. 45 to 55 million deaths in just 3 decades. The Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962. Mao's plan to rapidly industrialize China, collectivize farms, build backyard steel furnaces, surpass Britain in production. The result? The worst famine in human history. Grain requisitions were based on inflated production reports. Local officials, terrified of punishment, reported record harvests that just didn't even exist. The state seized grain anyways. 30 to 45 million people starved. In some regions, cannibalism was documented. Parents ate their own children. The state's response? Denial and more requisitions. This wasn't incompetence, this was policy. Mao was told about the famine and refused to reduce quotas. When officials questioned him, they were purged. The Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976. Mao unleashed the Red Guards to purge counter-revolutionaries, teachers, intellectuals, anyone with a hint of bourgeois thinking. Struggle sessions. Public humiliation, torture, execution. Children denounce parents. Students beat teachers to death. 1.5 to 2 million killed. Millions more driven to suicide. Mao's campaign destroyed Chinese culture. Ancient texts burnt. Temples demolished. Traditional values erased. The system was totalitarian perfection. Every aspect of life controlled. Thought itself was policed. Mao's portrait still hangs in Tiananmen Square. That's number 4. Number 3. Stalinist Soviet Union. The Soviet Union under Stalin, 1924 to 1953. 20 to 25 million deaths, and that's a conservative estimate. Stalin's evil was bureaucratic, industrialized death. The Holodomor from 1932 to 1933, aka the Ukrainian famine, 3.5 to 5 million dead, not from drought, but from engineered starvation. Stalin collectivized agriculture. Peasants resisted, so he confiscated all grain. Guards shot anyone trying to harvest. Villages were sealed off. People starved by the millions. This wasn't accidental, it was punishment. Ukraine was being too independent, too nationalist. Stalin had to starve them into submission. The Great Purge, 1936 to 1938. Stalin eliminated anyone he perceived as a threat. 750,000 executed in just 2 years. Show trials, forced confessions, and mass graves. The NKVD had quotas for arrests. Each region required to identify a certain percentage of enemies of the people. Innocent people executed to meet bureaucratic targets. The Gulag system. Forced labor camps across Siberia. 18 million people passed through. Death rates range from 10% to 30% per year. Starvation, exposure, overwork. And Stalin's paranoia meant the purges never ended. World War II veterans were sent to camps because they'd seen the West. Doctors, generals, his own loyalists, everyone was suspect. The Soviet Union became a nation living in terror. Neighbors denounced neighbors. Children informed on parents. The state was everywhere, always watching. Stalin didn't just kill. He created a system where fear was the foundation of society. And that's number 3. Number 2, Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1945, just 12 years. 17 million murdered in the Holocaust and Nazi conquests. 6 million Jews, 5 million Poles, Roma, disabled people, homosexuals, political prisoners. But the number doesn't capture the industrial efficiency of the evil. The Nazis did not just kill, they systematized genocide. The final solution, not mob violence, bureaucratic extermination, train schedules, camp blueprints, gas chamber capacity calculations, Zyklon B ordered in bulk. Auschwitz-Birkenau. At peak operation, 6,000 people murdered per day. Selections on the train platform, left for labor, right for immediate death. Children, elderly, pregnant women, straight to the gas chambers. Medical experiments. Joseph Mengelé's twin studies, hypothermia experiments, forced sterilization, vivisection, prisoners as lab rats. The Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads that followed the Wehrmacht into Eastern Europe. Over 1 million Jews shot in mass executions, entire villages lined up at pits and machine gunned. The Nazis created a hierarchy of humanity, Aryans at the top, everyone else ranked by racial purity. Untermenschen, subhumans. Not people, just numbers. And when Germany fell, they tried to erase the evidence, burning documents, destroying camps, denying everything. But the evidence remained. Millions of corpses, survivors with tattoos, testimonies. The Holocaust wasn't chaos. It was planned, organized, industrialized murder on a scale never seen before. And that's number 2. Number 1, the Belgian Congo. Number 1 might surprise you, but when we look at the numbers, the methodology, and the pure cruelty, nothing compares. The Belgian Congo, 1885 to 1908. King Leopold II's private colony, not owned by Belgium, owned by one man. 10 to 15 million dead in just 23 years, half the population of the Congo Basin. Leopold called it civilizing Africa. The reality, slavery and terror. The Congo produced rubber. Leopold wanted maximum extraction of this, so his agents used the chicote, a whip made from hippo hide. Workers who failed to meet quotas were whipped to death. But the signature atrocity? Severed hands. Leopold's force publique couldn't waste bullets, so for every bullet fired, soldiers had to prove they'd killed someone by bringing back a severed right hand. This created a trade in severed hands. Villagers raided not for resources, but for hands to meet quotas. Children's hands, women's hands. Photographs exist. Fathers holding their children's severed hands. Villages surrounded by baskets of hands. And this was just the visible horror. The real killer was forced labor and starvation, entire regions depopulated, families destroyed. When international outcry finally forced Leopold to hand control to the Belgian government in 1908, the damage was already done. The Congo never recovered. 10 to 15 million people, half the population, dead in 2 decades. Per capita, the deadliest regime in history. And Leopold, he kept his whole fortune. He died wealthy in 1909. His statue stood in Belgium until 2020. And that was number 1. Conclusion. The pattern. 10 empires, separated by centuries, continents, and cultures. But every single one followed the same exact pattern. Stage 1, grand vision. We're building something great. Utopia, purity, progress. Stage 2, expansion justified by superiority. We're better, they're lesser. This is destiny. Stage 3, violence becomes industrial. Not battlefield chaos, but organized systems of death. Stage 4, dehumanization becomes law. Certain people reclassified as subhuman. Not murder, but pest control. Stage 5, the empire turns on itself. Purges, paranoia, the machine eats itself. Stage 6, collapse. However, the scars, they remain for generations. The pattern repeats because empires follow the same logic. Concentration of power plus ideological certainty plus industrial capability. That equals mass atrocity. And here's a warning. The pattern is still here. Look at the world today. The tools are more advanced. The surveillance is total. The capacity for organized violence is greater than it ever has been. The empires we counted down, they're gone, but the pattern that created them, it's waiting. It's always waiting for the next grand vision, the next superior ideology, the next time somebody says, this time will be different. It never is. If this made you see the pattern, subscribe, because understanding history isn't just about memorizing dates. It's about recognizing the warning signs before it's too late. The answers are not hiding in the future. They're written in blood from the past. Thanks for watching.